If you are watching this right now, I really hope that you are safe and sound and have not got caught in the crossfire of what I am calling the Great Gacha War of 2024. It has been an absolute battleground within the gacha space in the last couple of months, really starting when Wuthering Waves came out, and now it's gotten even worse with Zenless Zone Zero being out. You're really starting to see the tribalism amongst gacha players and how they just really love their games and want to defend them, and more importantly, just completely shit on games that other people like. I do want to get more into tribalism later in this video, but for now I have just completed the Zenless Zone Zero chapter 3, so I'm all done with the story in 1.0. I've kind of seen all the game has to offer, really. I'm in that slower mid-game grind now, and so I thought this would be a great time as someone who has played a lot of gacha games. I'm a day one Genshin player, day one Wuthering Waves player, day one Star Rail player, and just a wide gacha game enjoyer. I thought it would be fair for me to kind of tell you guys why I think this game is great and why it's not so great. All right, the first thing I'd like to touch on is probably the most contentious point in this video because a lot of people are arguing about this, and that is the combat system in Zenless Zone Zero. You have a lot of people saying that this is just a basic attack simulator, right? You just spam that left click button and watch things die. And if you've only played the first couple hours of the story, I totally agree with you, because those combat missions in the story are absolutely mind-numbing. It was tough to get through, and it's overstimulating too, because there's all these little enemies with tiny little break bars, so you break them really quick and constantly trigger these chain attacks, and it's all these flashy lights in your face. You're like, what the hell is happening? Is this a Michael Bay movie? And just kind of watch things die. It feels more like watching a cutscene that you're not in control of it all, rather than actually playing a game. So those first couple hours, absolutely painful. I didn't enjoy it really. If you've only played those first couple hours, I totally get that point. But once you get past that and get to the more challenging stuff where it's more cutting edge, the enemies are higher level than you, you're dealing with these tougher bosses like the one on the screen now, it really starts to become engaging, and I see how this game could blossom into something great. To compare it to Wuthering Waves, I know it's a very different game, but they both have semi-similar combat systems. I think that Zenless Zone Zero has the better like core combat, like the better mechanics with all the skills and the parries and the dodge attacks and stuff, whereas Wuthering Waves has the better boss fights right now. You really have to like study those boss fights and learn all their patterns, which makes it a lot more engaging. Now, I think that once Zenless Zone Zero steps it up in that boss department, I think that they will be better than Wuthering overall. But that's a big like if, right? Because these bosses that we have in 1.0 are pretty good, especially this guy. You start to realize like, oh, I can't just parry all the time. This is a limited resource, and you have to think about what you're doing a little more. But other than that, there's not a whole ton of great bosses, and only like 3 or 4 at launch. So they need to step it up there. But once they do, I think that Zenless Zone Zero will have the better combat system, especially if you get past those first 10 hours. Now, if you can't get past it, I don't blame you. That's a big ask. But in my opinion, the story, which is the next thing I'd like to talk about, is also very engaging. Now, what got me hooked to this game and what got me through those first couple hours especially, so I could get to the more engaging combat portions, is the amazing story that we got in 1.0, which is somehow another contentious point that a lot of people are arguing about. A lot of people are saying it's dog shit. They think it's a yap fest. There's no major plot points. There's no like overarching story at all, and they don't get it. And I don't know what those people are talking about, man. I think they're all delusional, and I don't know where they got this idea. I think a lot of people, especially like streamers, just don't want to read all this story. They see characters talking and they don't understand that it's a gacha game where they're trying to sell you these characters' personalities and really get you parasocial with them, right? And so they just don't want to read. They're trying to read chat and they're trying to entertain at the same time, and so they're like, oh, they're just yapping. I don't know what's going on, because their mind is in a million different places. But if you lock in this game and you actually like pay attention to what's going on, it's so engaging, and especially with the way they present it with all these different cutscenes. I mean, look at this. Have you ever seen a cutscene like this in a gacha game? And there's like probably a dozen of these really highly produced cutscenes in the first 3 chapters of the game. On top of that, there's the comic panels that make dialogue just so much more fun to watch, and I love all the character art in there. It was very engaging to me. The character designs too. I don't think there's a badly written character in the 1.0 patch. Now, I do understand to a point why people are claiming that this story is fragmented and that each chapter feels like a self-contained story that doesn't relate to the other ones, but I do disagree in the end, and let me tell you why. I think that this story is sort of One Piece-esque, which might sound blasphemous to some people, but let me explain. I think that each chapter is sort of its own arc, right? Where we go to a new place, we meet a few new characters, and we fall in love with them, and then they kind of fall to the wayside for a bit and we move on. Maybe they'll come back in later chapters and you'll be like, oh shit, it's that person again, I love them. But for the most part, it's these self-contained stories that drive along an overarching plot. And just like in One Piece 2, at the end of each chapter, there's always this oh shit moment where maybe it cuts off to the villains and they're sitting around a table and it shows you a comic panel of them like plotting their evil deeds and talking about the repercussions of what just happened in this chapter, and you're like, oh shit, this is how it's connected. I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. At least that's how it was for me. I know that we can't really see the clear overarching plot line yet, but there's definitely some signs there. We don't have like faces or names to who's like the big bad, but you can definitely see it's there. And personally, I'm super invested in the story and I think it's great. Now, the one place that I think the story fell extremely short, and the one place I will agree with the yapping point, is during this TV exploration mode. And this is absolutely awful. It's littered throughout the game in all of the modes, but particularly in the story mode, I think that's where the flaws of this system really start to show themselves. And like I said, there's a ton of real yapping, not just characters talking, but real yapping. They try to mix exposition with directions on the mechanics of this mode, and it's just awful. I'm just spamming the spacebar, dreading the whole experience. And it's also just the same stuff from chapter 1 to chapter 3. There's a few different mechanics, but there's no new environments to make me feel like I'm in a different place from chapter to chapter, right? When you go into the combat portions, you kind of see where you're at, but it's very few and far between, to where this is never going to feel different. Like, I imagine if they continue with this into chapter 6, this is still going to feel like chapter 1, right? This is actually just a side commission, but could you tell? No, because they all look the same. The story, the combat ones, the exploration ones, it's all the same. I despise this system. It's super boring. Maybe if it was just like one random mode, I wouldn't mind it so much, but having this as your main exploration system is awful. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is very important to me personally, and that is because I am a gacha gamer, right? I'm not just a Hoyo game player. I'm not just a Zenless Zone Zero player. I am someone who plays maybe 5 or 6 different gachas every day. And I say all that to say my opinion is very subjective, so take this with a grain of salt. But I just want to talk about your daily grind, how long it takes, and the systems that are attached to it, and whether it's fair or not. First of all, the errands I love. I never have to go out of my way to do any of this stuff. It's just stuff that you're going to do naturally, and you just get free XP. Takes seconds. I love this. I don't have to think about it. I still hate having to do my daily quests in Wuthering Waves, and that is not an issue here. As far as spending your resin goes, I love this new system. I've never seen this in a gacha game before, where particularly if we go here, let me show you guys. Not only can I choose to spend 100 resin on whatever I want to farm, I can also create my own custom domain with like a mix of, maybe I want Denny's, maybe I want, you know, ascension materials and talents all in one, and I can spend 100 on each run. That means for me, as someone who's trying to log in, do my dailies really quickly so I can get to the next game, this is going to go extremely quickly. At the most, I'll have to do like 3 runs, and I can feel like I made some progress, so that at the end of the week, when I really want to sit down and do the challenging content that's engaging and that I look forward to, I can feel like I've prepared just by logging in for a few minutes every day. And I think Zenless Zone Zero nails that. As a gacha gamer, I can picture myself playing this game for a long time because it's not going to waste my time. Okay, 2 more things that I want to talk about, and the first is the casual content that they put in the game, which I think they nailed. And I'm talking about things like, for example, the trust system, where you can unlock these 3D backgrounds if you get your trust high enough with a character. And how it works, if you're not familiar, is you can go into your phone in the game, of course, and DM all the different characters that you pulled, and then you can go meet them in the overworld. So it kind of makes it feel more alive. That's something that a lot of Genshin players always wanted, right? Was to see their characters that they pulled out in the real world to make it feel like they're more real, you know, adding to the parasocial aspect. And I love how the end reward is a 3D background. It's just like Blue Archive, which is a perfect system to me. So something great for casual gamers to grind for. Also, the arcade system. I don't know if you guys have been into the arcade past when you just have to go with Billy for the first time, but those games are prime. I love the 2 that they started with, and it's just something that they can expand on going into the future that will just add to the the meat of this game, right? And other things like the video store and things like that, just all these little casual systems to keep gamers that maybe aren't so focused on just pushing CU defense, pushing Hollow Zero. I just love how they added things that will keep those casual players engaged as well. Last thing, we gotta talk about this, of course, and that is the gacha system. And honestly, I don't have a ton to say about it, because if you played a Hoyo game in the last 4 years, you know what you're getting yourself into here. It's the same system, 50-50 on the limited banner, and then you're guaranteed if you don't get it. They do have the Honkai Star Rail weapon banner where it's 75-25, which sounds good on paper, but it could mean that you're just pulling for a long time and you never get the weapon. I hate the 75-25, and I will probably not roll on many of these. And then the standard banner is the same as Honkai Star Rail as well. You get the free character at 300 pulls. Obviously this 210 is not relatable, ignore that, I'm totally relatable. The one big change is of course the Bangbu banner, which I think is awesome. Having all of these pulls free to play, you just have to play the game to get them. It means that whether you spent $6,000 on this game or $10 on the battle pass, you're gonna have basically the same amount of Bangbus unless you got extremely lucky. I think that's really fresh for Hoyo games. And love it. At the moment, I don't love it because I can't just like pay my way to get the next one I want after I got Shark Boo. But I do think it's the more fair system and overall very healthy for the game and attractive to a lot of players. I do got to shout them out. I think we all have to recognize that they gave us a ton of free pulls and are continuing to give us free pulls, at least at the start of the game, right? It's better than any other Hoyo release has ever been with the amount of free pulls. Will this continue into the future? Probably not, because they're smart and they want to make money, right? But so far they've been super generous and we have to shout that out. In the long run though, it's going to end up being the same as other Hoyo games. These pulls are going to dry up. They're not going to continue to be this generous, and it's going to be near impossible to guarantee that you get every limited character that you desire. At the best, maybe like every 3 to 4 months you can get one that you really want, but you are going to have to pay. That's just the Hoyo standard, right? They're damn near the Disney of China at this point. It's what we all got to live with, okay? We created this problem and it's a reality. I'm used to it, so it's whatever. I'll get the characters I want, and I don't mind paying a little. For free to plays, it's not the best gacha game in the world, but probably the best out of all the Hoyo games, just not good compared to the rest of the industry. The question I like to ask when I review these gacha games that just came out is whether they have the lasting power or not, because that's kind of the main goal of gacha games, right? Is to last as long as they can and continue making money years down the line. And with Zenless Zone Zero, that becomes a bit of a nuanced question, only because it's made by Hoyo Games, right? They're the monolith of the gacha gaming industry, so of course they have the marketing dollars and the brand recognition to make Zenless Zone Zero last for a very long time. So the question becomes with this game is whether or not it can keep up or even surpass its predecessors, being Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact, and to a lesser degree, Honkai Impact III. And currently right now, I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's on track to surpass either of those in sales and popularity. And so let's talk about the things that I think it needs to work on to become even better than those two. The first and most important thing that I think they need to work on right away is the boss design in this game, because as I said earlier, I think the combat at its core is one of the greatest combat systems in a gacha game. But we really can't see its full potential because most of the enemies we have are just training dummies right now. So we can't see like all the nuances, and we aren't forced to use those nuances quite yet. We do have some harder bosses where we're starting to see where some things could shine, but they really just need to make more engaging fights to really make the combat system as good as it could be. The second thing I think they need to work on is the character design and the story. As I said, I love the story right now, but the pacing just gets completely ruined by that TV system. I think that they've mentioned that they're going to move away from that in future story missions, and so I really hope that that's the case, because it just kind of really puts a damper on how great the story is just when you read the narrative. Also, the character designs, I personally like them, but I understand people saying they're a little lackluster and less memorable than other Hoyo characters, and that's really where they hang the hat on, is great character designs and getting that parasocial relationship up with these anime 3D renders. I do believe they'll get it together though. I mean, this is hoyoverse we're talking about. They're basically the kings of Rule 34. They're going to figure out how to design some good characters eventually. The last thing that I think that they need to push on is the casual content in the game. This is another thing that Hoyo in general kind of hangs their hat on, is having a ton of casual content for people who aren't hyper focused on just the combat in the game. And they've done a great job so far with the arcade, with the trust system, with the little systems like the video shop, and I think they need to expand on those, add more arcade games, add more like evergreen casual content, and I think that the game will continue to flourish because they already have the player base that enjoys things like that. So there you go, guys. Those are my 3 things I think they need to push in order to be even more successful than they are at launch. Otherwise, I don't think that it's ever going to surpass their 2 other games that have become just like larger than life, right? It's big shoes to fill, but I think they can do it if they focus on those 3 things that I talked about. Before I go, I want to touch on the meta conversation around Zenless Zone Zero and this insane discourse that has been taking place on Twitter and YouTube over the last week. And I think it starts with these influencers who have a bunch of followers who can put out their opinion and have millions of people see it all at once, and they don't know how to construct an argument. They don't know how to organize their thoughts in a way that makes sense. So instead of just mindlessly following the opinion of someone you have a vague parasocial relationship with, I wanted to leave you guys with 2 things to think about before you post your opinion about really any video game online. The first thing is to ask yourself, did I really play this game? Because it's totally okay if you made it through an hour or 2 of this game and decided, this isn't for me, this is really boring, the story isn't gripping me, the combat isn't gripping me, but that is a completely different argument than saying that the combat is bad. If you think that the combat is bad, I expect that you've experienced the combat and know its ins and outs, right? That's a completely different argument than saying the first couple hours of the game didn't grip me. It's totally okay to make those 2 criticisms, but they're very different and you should not conflate the 2. The second thing to remember is that in order to say you like one game, you don't have to say you dislike another game. In fact, that just makes your argument worse because it's going to distract from the good points you're making about why said game is so good and just make it about why you hate another game. This just makes you seem bitter and honestly pretty cringe. Now, this is the internet. We all have a right to our own opinion, and that's kind of what we're here for, right? Is sharing what we think. But I'm just saying, maybe think about these 2 things that I mentioned before you go posting stuff, especially if you have a big voice, you have a lot of followers, because you need to be careful that these narratives don't get created that will make these cesspools of just people arguing all day, because no one wants to look at that. And I love Wuthering Waves, I love Zenless Zone Zero. I don't get the point in arguing about which is better. This is tribalism in its lowest form. With all that being said, please let me know down in the comments what you think of the game, and make sure you remember those 2 things. I'll be the conscious in the back of your mind. I appreciate you watching the video this far. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. That's all I have for this one, and I'll see you next time. Peace.